After the Pistons have now bought out Blake Griffin, we're all left wondering as to which team will now sign him. And as buyouts tend to go, Blake will most likely sign with a contender, and he could be that extra little piece that a team needs to go and win the title. And from what I've heard so far, the teams that are interested in him are the Brooklyn Nets, the Golden State Warriors, the Miami Heat, and the Portland Trail Blazers. But at this point in time, he could really go to any team. So let's discuss which teams Blake Griffin could go to and where I think would be the best fit for him. But let's start by talking about Blake's game, as he's drastically changed as a player these past few years. When you think of Blake Griffin, what will most likely come to mind is his crazy dunks and posters that we used to see all the time from Blake. As after all, he is one of the greatest dunkers of all time. But if you watch any game from Blake Griffin over the last year, then I can promise you that you won't have seen a single dunk from Blake, as he hasn't dunked since 2019, which is crazy to think. In terms of his last 2 seasons, in fact, he's only played 38 games due to the many injuries that he's suffered, and his game has greatly suffered too. His career field goal percentage dropped from a career average of 50% to just 36%, and to try and fit in with the times, Blake started shooting lots of 3-pointers, which was a huge mistake. He's shooting over 6 threes a game, but with a 3-point percentage of just 28.1%, which is terrible. And to put into perspective how bad of a 3-point percentage that is, it's even worse than Russell Westbrook's career average, which is 30.1%. And I understand this is very harsh, but he doesn't really have any standout strengths right now, as he's trying to completely change his offensive game to still be a good player. And I do pity Blake as well, as I'm sure he wishes he could still be the high-flying dunker that he once was, but it's physically impossible for him. He definitely does still have some advantages on the offensive end though, and he needs to utilise them more. His post-up game is the only area in which he can still somewhat dominate, as his upper body strength is still all there. And of course he's not as bouncy as he used to be, but he's still a very strong player. He can establish his position in the low post and slowly back down his man with his strength. It's not pretty and not particularly fun basketball to watch, but his jump hook is by far the best shot right now. He has quite a nice touch around the basket, and with his use of pump fakes, he gets himself a lot of easy layups. He does predominantly use his right hand and doesn't really like using his left, but from what I've seen this isn't a huge problem. Something he needs to improve though is his awareness when posting up, as he'll often get double teamed and one of his teammates will be left wide open, and the pass would be a better option than to go up for the shot. He does sometimes make the right pass, but it just seems like once he gets his mind set on going to the basket, that's what he's going to do. But the biggest change I'd like to see Blake make to his game is cutting out almost all of his 3-pointers, because when you're shooting less than 30% from 3, you should only be taking wide open threes and probably around 2 a game. But now to actually answer the question as to which team should sign Blake Griffin, there's a lot of factors you need to consider. And probably the biggest factor being, where would Blake Griffin actually fit as a player? And with his game right now, he doesn't particularly fit with any team, but then he wouldn't be harmful either. He'd just be like a 3rd or 4th option for a team. And now the first team I want to talk about is the Portland Trail Blazers, like I mentioned earlier, because they've lost a lot of size this season and their second best scorer in CJ McCollum. Now the Blazers aren't really a contender in my opinion, but Blake would certainly raise their level. Yusuf Nurkic is still out with a wrist injury, and it could be a little while before we see him back playing. And like I mentioned earlier, I believe Blake needs to lean into his post game a bit more and play more like a centre rather than a power forward. And while CJ McCollum is still out injured, he can be the 4th scorer behind Dame, Gary Trent and Carmelo Anthony when he's having a good night. And then by playoff time, when Nurkic and McCollum are both back healthy, I'd like to see Griffin taken off the bench role and be more of an impact player on reduced minutes. Now let's move on to the Brooklyn Nets, who do seem to be the frontrunner to sign Blake Griffin, but I really don't like this trade. Because it's no secret that the Nets are lacking defensively, but Blake Griffin really wouldn't fix that problem. They certainly don't need any more offensive help whatsoever, as they have KD, Kyrie and Harden, and they really just need a defensive centre or power forward, which Blake Griffin is not. So I think the Nets should just hold out on this trade, and I would be very, very surprised if they do actually end up going through with it. But now let's talk about the Warriors though, and this is really an interesting one. They're already quite sound defensively, and they have the 6th best defensive rating currently in the league. On the offensive end though, they're certainly worse, and they don't have a great inside presence. They do have James Wiseman, who I think will go on to be a great centre, but in terms of the post, I'd much rather have Blake Griffin. And it would certainly be a long shot for the Warriors to win the title, but I wouldn't write them off. As long as the Warriors have Steph Curry playing, I'd say near enough anything is possible, and then if they have Blake Griffin too, he's another offensive weapon they can use. So in my expert opinion obviously, I think the Warriors is the best destination for Blake. And as well, I'm sure he'd love to move back to California, as it's certainly much nicer than Detroit, Michigan. But as of me writing this, it really is all up in the air as to where Blake Griffin could go, and like I said earlier, there's so many different teams that could sign him. One thing I am certain about though is that Blake certainly has more to give and his career isn't over quite yet. So where do you think Blake Griffin is most likely to sign, and what team would you like to see him play for? Feel free to leave any comments down below, as I always get back to every single one, and then as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video.